Hello everyone, I'm Brock, the Curly Man behind Curly Man's Comics, and today I'm going to be going over 10 weird, funny, and shocking recalled and misprinted comic books. I want to start off with asking you guys to like and subscribe, and before I talk too much about the recalled and misprinted comics, I want to show you some of the items that I have that are misprinted, starting off with this baseball card. And I'll do a closer up or a bigger picture of it so you can see it. But to this day, I'm still confused what's going on with his mouth. I can't tell if they accidentally photoshopped another person's mouth onto his mouth, if they photoshopped a butthole onto his mouth. I really have no idea what's going on there, but it's one of my favorite baseball cards that I have. And another thing that I have that's misprinted is this figure of Lydia that clearly says Glenn on the front. And I can guarantee you it's not Glenn, but just another funny, weird thing I saw that I had to pick up. But now let's get into the recalled and misprinted comic books. Alright, so one of the weird recalled and misprinted comics that I found was League of Extraordinary Gentlemen number 5. And this is a DC comic, but in this DC comic there was a Marvel branded douche that you could buy. And that was kind of the main reason they decided to recall this comic, but I'm more concerned of why a comic book is selling a douche in my opinion. I don't know. Maybe I'm off on this one. If you're interested in getting one of these comics, there's been no recent sales of it on eBay. It's a pretty rare comic to find. There's some listed right now for around $1,300 or best offer for a CGC 9.8, but there's also a 9.2 CGC book selling at around $80 right now, but it's still at auction. So another recalled comic I want to mention is Elektra Marble Knights Volume 2 Issue number 3. And in this comic she appears naked, but she's covered by multiple different word bubbles, and there's no real nudity in the comic, but it was still enough to offend multiple different comic book buyers. So they did a recall, and they just did some kind of like scribbled on black underwear on her, which I thought was kind of weird, but it's a pretty cheap book if you're interested in getting it at around $30 raw. Another shocking, and this one's definitely an unfortunate misprint, happened in Wolverine 131. And what happened is they were describing Sabretooth, and they meant to say killer and accidentally put in a racial slur. And why all of this happened was originally Brian Vaughan, who's a very well-known scripter and writer. He wrote Why Last Man. He wrote this story, and he described in the story Sabretooth as an assassin. The editor chose to change this word to killer, and when the word was faxed over to be printed, it was garbled up, kind of cut off, and that's where the racial slur came in. And it's really unfortunate that it went to print. It was already late, so they didn't have time to reread it, and it sent out and it had this word in it. And one of the most unfortunate things that they mentioned is it's a rather unused and old racial slur that has kind of become forgotten to some people over time, and they were really sad that this might have caused a resurgence of the use of this word. So it's a very sad, unfortunate story. If you're interested in having this shocking mistake, you can get one for around $10 raw on eBay, and recently one sold for around $80 at a 9.8. Another kind of cool misprint happened with Silver Surfer issue 50. And what happened was the silver foil that was supposed to be on the cover, covering the font that said Silver Surfer as well as Silver Surfer himself, was misprinted on a lot of issues. Some issues it didn't have it at all. Some issues it was just off by an inch or two. So some issues you see a white Silver Surfer next to a silver Surfer. It's very cool and interesting to look at. I thought it was really cool at least. They don't come up all that often. One recently sold raw for around $50, and there's some listed on eBay at about 9.4 and up to a 9.8, around $300 depending on how cool the cover looks. Another shocking misprint happened in Captain America 602. And what happened is there's a lot of protesters in this comic holding signs, and one of the protesters is holding a sign that says, "Teabag the libs before they teabag you." And the writer of this comic says he has no idea how these words got in there. An editor must have slipped them in somehow. They oddly didn't do a recall on this comic, they just kind of fixed it and printed out more of them. So it's a pretty easy comic to get, and you can get it for around $10 raw. One of the most popular and well-known recalled comics is Elseworlds 80-page Giant number 1. And in this comic, it has Superman as a young little baby being babysitted by someone, and he happens to get into a microwave and get microwaved. Some people saw this as offensive, odd, it just shouldn't have belonged. So they did a recall of this comic. I think it's a kind of funny story. They're pretty easy to find, around $100 raw, and they're being listed at around $400 for a 9.8, but one 9.8 oddly sold recently for only $40. Alright, so probably one of my favorite misprints and recalled comics that happened occurred in Universe X Spidey issue number 1. And what happened in this was Al Milgrom was the artist. And in some books on the bookcase in the background, he hid a message to Bob Harris, who was a former Marvel editor that was let go. And in the book titles it says, "Harris, haha, he's gone. Good riddance to bad rubbish. He was a nasty SOB." I just saw this really funny. As a comic artist, I can only imagine trying to hide some words in about someone in the book. So this is one of my favorites by far. You can get cover A for around $100, but cover B is quite a bit cheaper at around $40. Alright, so another pretty shocking thing that happened, not necessarily in a misprint or recalled comic, just very unfortunate timing, happened in Action Comics 309. And in this comic, Kennedy appears. And this comic unfortunately came out a week after Kennedy's assassination. So this obviously was very poor timing, a very shocking thing. They never recalled or really did a misprint for it, so it's pretty easy to find at only around $10 to $20 raw. This one isn't necessarily a misprint, but it was a recalled comic, and it was very unfortunately timed, and it happened in The Adventures of Superman 596. And this was released one day after the attack on the Twin Towers. And what happened in this comic is there's a panel that shows the Metropolis Twin Lextorp Towers sustaining damage, and it looks very similar to the Twin Towers. Terrible timing, very unfortunate. They recalled this one, or actually they didn't recall this one, but they said they would refund anyone that wanted to send it back to them. Unfortunately, no one really did because it's just such a shocking comic, so it's a pretty easy one to find for around $10 raw. Okay, I'm gonna leave it off with a bang. I think this is the funniest recalled comic that ever happened, and it happened in Scott Snyder's Swamp Thing 11 from the New 52 run. And Scott Snyder said that he got a call at a convention saying that they need to trash the comic that he just came out with. And he was really confused on why this was happening. And what happened was there was a tentacle in this comic coming from one of the villains that Swamp Thing was fighting. And it looks very phallic. I think it's pretty hilarious that it happened. He's like, "Where is it? I don't see anything that's wrong." And then they're like, "Panel 4, and he looks at it, it's definitely there. He said it wasn't there originally, but he asked the artist to add in more tentacles on that panel and the first panel of the page, so that's where I came in. Unfortunately, this is a really hard comic to find. I couldn't find any that have sold recently on eBay or that are for sale on eBay. But it's still a funny thing to look at. If one ever pops up, I'm sure it's going to go for a huge price. But this is by far my favorite recalled comic. And those are 10 of the most shocking, recalled, and funny comics I could find. I want to ask you guys one more time to like and subscribe, and maybe leave a comment on some comics that I might have missed that were recalled and misprinted, because I would love to learn more. I'll leave a link of where I found all the information for this video. But without further more, I'm Brock, the Curly Man behind Curly Man's Comics, signing out.